Hello and welcome, Exiles, to look at Vaal Cold Snap, Architect of Chaos. Now, let's start off with the basic idea of the build, the concept behind it. Now, when I saw this Ascendancy, I got real excited because it had one of my favorite nodes, Shepherd of Souls, and it also had another node that had reduced cost and skill effect duration. Now, the fun thing about this, the way Shepherd of Souls works, is it says, hey, all your Vaal skills, they cost 1/5 of their normal price, 80% less, and they get increased cost if you use multiple in a row within 8 seconds. So the idea behind this is if you have a Vaal skill that has some sort of duration that you can scale longer than 8 seconds and you only press it once every 8 seconds, you don't ever get this downside of the increased soul cost, which means Shepherd of Souls is effectively giving you 1/5 of a Vaal soul cost, which is very big for being able to use a Vaal skill multiple times in a row. On top of that, the second Ascendancy that has reduced soul cost and Vaal skill duration, this allows us to go and then cut that cost in half. Now, something that Dan figured out when he was testing with Vaal skills is the Vaal skills do not round down. For example, Vaal Cold Snap, I believe, is 35 Vaal souls. So 1/10 of the cost would be 3.5. It rounds up to 4, which means you don't get 10 casts, you get 8, which is still pretty good. But it's important to know that that's how it works because that changes how many casts we can get in a row with the skill. Next up, an important part about this is we get additional 10% Vaal skill or Vaal souls on kill per small node, which means we have a 40% chance to get an additional soul when we kill a monster. And this is important because how does this build play out? The idea is you start a map, you have regular cold snap, you go kill a pack or two of monsters. Technically, with this 40% additional souls, we only need to kill really about 35 monsters to get about 35 Vaal skills, roughly thereabouts, which is about 1 pack to 2 packs of monsters. And then what happens is you can then chain 8 Vaal Cold Snaps in a row. Now, 8 skills in a row, how long of the duration does that get us? It gets us around 60 seconds. The way we can do this is the Vaal Cold Snap lasts at base 4 seconds. And then you add in efficacy, that's about 20% duration. Malevolence, that's about 20% duration. The Vaal skill, 50% duration from the Ascendancy. Already we're about 90% skill effect duration. If you add in a dot mastery, there's another 15% there. And you're already over 100% duration, which takes you from a 4-second skill to an 8-second skill. And what that means is the concept works. You can add a little bit more duration on top of that if you want to for more feels good nature. That is your prerogative. If you want to try to force in like a duration wheel, that is completely up to you. But the idea is we will chain those 8 Vaal skills uses in a row. We'll just be shield charging around the map with this nice Blizzard AoE, which I will show in game as a demonstration after this. And once you get to that 60-second duration, there then is a fall off period because your Vaal skill prevention duration is like 6 seconds when your Vaal skill duration is 4 seconds, which means the Vaal soul game prevention is 12 seconds. So what happens is you chain these skills 8 times in a row for 60 seconds straight. There then is going to be a 4-second window where you have soul gain prevention. This is your downtime essentially on the skill. And then after those 4 seconds are up, you can kill either another pack and go again for another 60 seconds straight, or you can include something like a Soul Ripper in your build, which just is a flask that generates Vaal skills based on the amount of charges on it. So effectively, once that 4-second ends, you can immediately press the Vaal Soul Ripper and then go straight back into a full run of the Vaal skill and just get that many more uses out of it. For the most part, this should feel like effectively permanent Vaal skill uptime, but there will be occasional downtime in it, which roughly is about 7.5% of the time. So this should feel very good. It should be kind of like a cold righteous fire feeling. Another great thing about the build is we can pair it with another cool new Ascendancy, which is in the configurations. It's called Everlasting Sacrifice. What this what this Keystone node does is it says once you reach maximum energy shield, it will sacrifice the energy shield and then give you 5 max all res. Not just Ellie, but also Chaos as well, which is why you can see on our character, we are pushing max res to a decent amount without actually having to scale much max res on our gearing. Later on, if you min-max your gear pieces, you can obviously top this off at 90 all res, but this is a good initial start with just nodes on the tree. Now, the important factor for this Keystone is I want to say initially you should pair it with something like Eldritch Battery. If you look at our initial tree, we go over to Eldritch Battery. The reason being is we want to separate damage from hitting our ES. We want to recharge to never stop. The idea is recharge is 33% per second, which means in the total of 3 seconds, it will full go to 100%, and it will proc the sacrifice and give you the 5 max all res. Initially, I would recommend pairing Eldritch Battery with maybe a little bit of ES on gear and then a belt with the Regen ES when you're near a rare or unique enemy. This should effectively give you a solution for your mana on top of also keeping Everlasting Sacrifice at full uptime. That's the plan I'm going to go with initially. But then late game, when you get a Glorious Vanity with Divine Flesh and you essentially separate and make all damage bypass your ES is never damaged in that case as well, which means the recharge will just constantly keep going to full, and always keep you topped off on your Everlasting Sacrifice 5 max res. So that's a really cool part of the Ascendancy. The rest of the Ascendancy, if we look at the configuration, which is where we have the Ascendancy nodes we take, is Vaal Chaos Range, which is +3 of Vaal skills. This basically affects your base Cold Snap and your Vaal Cold Snap. So you're getting a dot damage from basically regular Cold Snap and Vaal Cold Snap. Vaal Cold Snap is a little bit higher damage, but having both of them on top of a boss is ideal. And then last but not least, your final lab will be Glimpse of Chaos. Technically, you could do the lab for blood magic initially before you get corrupted gear. This basically just solves your mana problems because you have a lot of life regen built into the character. And then you can swap over to Glimpse of Chaos when you start getting corrupted gear. The idea is this allows you to stack your HP higher and give you basically more tank. It also gives you some ES scaling, which for Eldritch Battery, that makes it a little bit more effective as a mana pool. But by the time you're corrupting gear, you're probably either playing Divine Flesh, or you're probably just playing Divine Flesh at that point. You might still be playing Eldritch Battery, or you could be playing Blood Magic. There are multiple ways to go about it. So that, and then we have small Ascendancy nodes for life from the small nodes, which is 4% per node. So that's the Ascendancy. Initially, I would do Glimpse of Chaos. I would do the Blood Magic, Hewn Flesh, I believe is what it's called, or the node before that. I can't remember the name 100%. But then once you start getting some corrupted pieces, then I would consider putting this on. You'll have a little bit of extra minus res because of it, but it's definitely worth the trade-off of 8% life per corrupted piece if you can get those corrupted pieces in your gear. So that's the basics of the Ascendancy. Now let's go over the starting plan to the character. If you're looking at the leveling tree, I tested out Cold Dot early game with Wintertide. I was not personally impressed with it. I think Fire Dot is much stronger, and I leave this up to you. If you want to just play a less suboptimal playstyle, but you want to play Cold Snap right away, you can play Cold Dot. It is fine. I did a character all the way from like level 16 with Cold Snap and Wintertide, and it worked fine. I did that all the way through a normal lab and up to Act 4, which I'm going to do some demonstration on next. But this is up to you. I personally found Fire Dot leveling or Firecaster leveling with the early 100% damage Elemental Overload, it's just too strong to ignore. In my opinion, I would do that all the way up to your normal lab. And then for your normal lab, I am going to recommend grabbing Polytheist, another Ascendancy, which has a node for Aberrath's Hooves. The reasoning behind this is Aberrath's Hooves, level 20, they showed a clip of the character in a port map, which is at the very least a T11 map, one-shotting with Aberrath's Hooves. I don't see how they could justify that being an Ascendancy node that somebody was going to use in the late game unless they gave it some decent flat, which should just absolutely destroy the campaign from normal lab to cruel, maybe even up to Merc lab. So I believe your strongest start for the character is doing a Firecaster base leveling, grabbing Aberrath's Hooves, and then I would probably respec at either Cruel Lab or Merc Lab, depending on how it goes. We have a tree that is based on doing Aberrath's Hooves initially, and then a small respec. It's not actually too bad. It's mostly swapping the fire nodes out for some cold nodes, which is if you wanted to swap over to doing Vaal Cold Snap at Cruel Lab. Part of my reasoning behind this is Vaal Cold Snap initially with just Shepherd of Souls, I don't think is quite smooth enough. And without the duration, you don't quite get the part where you get to press it and it lasts basically the whole 8 seconds. So there's a bit of awkwardness to it. Personally, I like the idea of swapping a Cruel Lab when you have both of those things and a Vaal Cold Snap, but I will leave that up to you. That's just what I'm going to recommend. So that's the leveling. And then later on around Merc Lab, this is just more of the tree getting filled out. We are going for a life scaling plus block defensive layer initially plus max res. And then the next upgrade to the defenses is later on. Well, first you have your level 90 tree where you're more filled out with block and max res and some stuff. Later on, I have a setup with Rathpith and just life scaling and good regen that I think will feel very good for pretty much all content for you to farm if you want to invest more into the character. We'll get into that a little bit later on. First, I want to showcase the Shepherd of Souls just so you can get an idea of what this looks like in game. I have a Shepherd of Souls on this wand. We just use the special mod from the runesmithing bench, so that way I could demonstrate what Shepherd of Souls does and how it looks in game. And we have a scuffed character gear of just basically an SSF run. I mean, technically I am in Settlers Trade League, but this is just the gear we picked up throughout leveling. and I'll showcase what this looks like as we are entering Act 4. So initially, you get your first pack of monsters, like 6 monsters here, right? You do Cold Snap. You'll see how there's generating souls. Effectively, what Shepherd of Souls is with the amount of soul cost or souls it would take for you to generate the use for 1 Vaal Cold Snap, you will generate 5 uses. So there were 5 monsters there. Obviously, when we get more of the Ascendancy nodes, we start getting 10% chance to gain Vaal Soul skills. So as you get your normal, your cruel, your Merc Lab, you get more Vaal skills on killing smaller packs of monsters. But obviously, entering maps, you'll get a lot more Vaal skills as the packs get more dense. But you'll see there, that was like, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 monsters, we're up to 3 Vaal skill uses. So the idea is, by the time you get to Cruel Lab, you'll have the 50% less cost on top of this and the duration, which means it'll feel better to just press Vaal Cold Snap and go. So anyways, let's say we're here. We've generated our 5 Vaal souls. You'll see the number 5 on the text there in the corner. As I press this, you'll see initially, let's say I press Vaal Cold Snap, it'll say we only have 2 uses. That's because the 100% increased soul cost is in effect, where if I wanted to spam it right in a row, I could use it again, but I don't want to do that because that would spend way more souls than I need to. The idea is we really want to get to that 8-second duration, which is why I'm stressing swapping to this in Cruel Lab, because that's when you get another 50% duration, which helps you hit that 8-second window, because then it goes back to 4 uses, because the idea is if you keep it outside that 8-second window, you use it, and then wait for the 8 seconds, use it again, you can chain and get full effect of the 80% less soul cost. But the way this would look if you were to do this in, let's say, at this point of the game where you're just doing Vaal Cold Snap, it's going to play kind of like RF a little bit, where you're just timing out your Vaal skill use, where you have a couple second downtime each time when you're waiting for the 8-second duration to be up to get full effect. And then you're going to be doing, you know, cold dot stuff where you can add in Wintertide Brand for some extra damage. That's up to you. That's the sort of playstyle it's going to be initially if you try to swap to this at normal lab. Again, I'm going to keep stressing, I would recommend doing it at Cruel when you get the extra reduced cost and the extra Vaal skill duration, where this thing lasts 8 seconds. It's going to feel a lot better, and it's going to feel more natural in terms of, like, when you see the blizzard come off, you already know you can press the button again because the 8-second window has gone over. Hopefully I'm making some sense about how this character works. Hopefully I've explained it somewhat well, but that's the idea. That's why I'm recommending not swapping to it until Cruel Lab. I also think Firecaster leveling to Cruel Lab is just, it's super freaking smooth, super easy, and that's the recommendation, to go Abraths and then respec, but you can do whatever you want to do. That is up to you. So anyways, that gets you through the leveling idea. Next up, I want to talk about in terms of what you should be doing from level 60 towards completing the campaign. Let's say you swap to Vaal Cold Snap, you're playing it, you're having fun. What should you be doing? I personally like the idea of getting a really early start on a couple gear pieces just to give you a big spike in softcore trade. And what that means is I would recommend at level 60 and onward, each time you level, I would go to the heist vendor. It's Wakano in the Rogue Harbor. He will sell demolition and lockpicking contracts. I would buy those. Every time you level, he resets his vendor. I would buy those and then run them, because demolition side contracts have the question mark chest, which gives chaos orbs like 1 to 2 almost every single chest you have. Usually in the contracts, there's about 2 question mark checks. So it gives you a lot of early chaos, and then lockpicking has currency chests, which also give currency and bubblegum currency as well. And I like that as the initial 20, 30 chaos you can get on a league start, and then use that currency to purchase yourself some early upgrades like Rhyme Gaze, like Vaal Caress. What are good about these items? These are T3 items. Vaal Caress is a really low level item. This gives you +5 to Vaal levels and basically permanent onslaught as well, which will feel very good for your early mapping. So I'd strongly suggest getting this. Doadri's very cheap, low level ring, gives you some all res and +1 curse, which means you can run Ellie weakness and frostbite for decent damage scaling. And then eventually, Calm's Heart, also very out of the meta. It's T2, it's a bit rare, but very few people use this in their builds, and it's just quite strong early on if you have decent amount of life nodes. I think this is hard to beat, but ultimately, it's up to you what you want to use it on in terms of currency. I do have a buy list, so if you look down here, there's this thing called a buy list at the bottom. You will highlight over this text right here, Control-C. And then what you will do is you'll pull up your trade site. This trade extension, Better Trading Extension, is what you need for these buy lists. It works on any basically Chromium web-based browser. And you will say import folder, Control-V. This should say Cold Snap Architect buy list, 18 bookmarks. I already have it right here because this is where I put it together. And it has your initial uniques I'd recommend, as well as it has multiple trade searches, weighted sums for rares. And all you need to know about these weighted sums is it's basically giving you a list of decent items to look for, as well as the ability to change the weighting. Now, my belt search includes a mandatory regen ES. You either need this or you need an empty suffix. I should probably put that in here, empty suffix. And the reason for this is very, very specific. When you click Rhyme Gaze, which is a very good early helmet, it comes with 50 dot multi. I really think it's worth using early on. It's just very good damage early on. It unfortunately comes with, if you look at Rhyme Gaze, it comes with a stat that says reduce energy shield recharge rate. In my early recommended tree, you have a Eldritch Battery up here. You have this Eldritch Battery node. What that less recharge ends up doing on top of the less recharge of Eldritch Battery is it really kind of bricks your sustain for your ES for how fast you're going to be able to, one, cast your skills, and two, proc Everlasting Sacrifice, because Everlasting Sacrifice is a part of the max res scaling. And that's why I think it's pretty much a mandatory include is a belt with the Regen ES mod. The idea is every time you're next to a rare, you're going to get basically a big boost of 200 ES regen, which should make filling up your ES very easy, as well as keeping your ability to cast skills very alive. That's the reason for that. Hopefully that makes some sense why I included that. I just want to stress that right now because it's very important for the character. And then outside that, there aren't really mandatory mods for the rest of the gear pieces, but I have weighted sums for stats that are important, and you can change the weighting based on how good you want your item to be, what your budget is, based on what's available on the trade, but that's what these are there for. After that, I also included technically Rathpith Globe, as well as a one Mod Watcher's Eye, just for some other things that would be nice to upgrade as you're ready to swap over to the life stacking version of the character, as well as upgrades like say, hey, you should use Essence of Delirium on a Fractured Ring. That's how you should craft a decent ring with Essence of Delirium. You should use Essence of Horror when you're looking at crafting an Archdemon Helm, and you should use a Archdemon Helm with an influence of Shaper. That's the influence you want because you want Hypothermia, and eventually you want the AoE mod. And then, of course, I have a search for decent fractures on rings. These are just decent base rings with some okay fracture mods of just one fracture, which is to help you for the Delirium Essence craft. So hopefully that makes sense for the progression of the character on how to play the character. It's basically starting out with this basic high life setup here where you're doing Eldritch Battery and you're going block max res. And then as you farm gear to be able to swap to the life gear, eventually you'll do a fairly big tree respec where you're going more into high-end life scaling in Rathpith to scale your percent damage. Let's look at the Rathpith character gear and the Rathpith skills. So when you're also looking at the tree, you want to make sure you have the Cold Snap skills for the stuff before Rathpith versus the Rathpith skills. There's a slight change in your aura reservations because Rathpith is using blood magic. The other setup is using not blood magic, just for reference. But anyways, as for the gearing, I try to keep it to basically mostly 3-stat gear pieces that should be pretty acquirable. This isn't like this is maybe like you've gotten your character like 90 plus, your 95 range, you farmed a few divines type of thing. Maybe 10 to 15 to 20 divine range probably is about what this would end up costing you, I think. Maybe less, maybe more, depending on where you cut corners. The biggest thing that I think gets a little bit expensive is this helmet, getting the AoE mod. Not getting the AoE mod is easy because you can force Hypothermia about 66% of the time with a Reforge Cold if you do a suffixes can be changed, Reforge Cold. But then getting the AoE mod is going to require more meta crafting. That's mostly just kind of min-maxing how the clear will feel on the build. Outside of that, most of the other stuff should be relatively achievable. And we are using, of course, a lot of Regen tattoos because the main recovery rare is Sustain. We're running both Righteous Fire and Annihilation's Approach. So we have 5k regen, but then we have net 3k because we have degens from those two sources. That is the idea of what's going on here on the character. Hopefully it makes a decent amount of sense for the build. And then I want to also go over that I didn't put a super late game PUB together because Dan already put together a really good one, and I'm not much of a PUB character or PUB player. I don't like putting super min-max stuff together in PUB. It kills my interest of playing builds, so I try to avoid it as much as possible. And Dan made a really good PUB, so why not just showcase his? If you want to go late game scaling, What he's doing here is very, very smart for getting suppress into the build and just fine-tuning extra little defensive layers. For example, he fits in Anathema, which allows him to put like things like Enfeeble on his extra curses, which is a nice defensive layer. He adds in a shield with block recover, which adds in huge sustain. He adds in the shield that he adds in is a shield that inflicts sap on the enemy, which is again a big defensive layer included. So for really late game min-maxing, I would look at this POB. It will be included in the description of the video below. I just figured I should showcase it because I'm not big on making super min-max things in POB, and I figured it'd be nice to showcase you something like that as an example of what you can strive for on the build. Late game of this character, with like this mid-budget level gear, is going to get you around 4 million DPS. Late game on Dan's POB, I think he has like Conk Effect in his helmet, and he has like +2 on his amulet and stuff like that. I think he's getting close to 10 million, 13 million DPS around there. That's going to be a very good feeling for basically all content. 10 million DPS on Ubers is pretty smooth, especially with the max hits you have on this character. 100k, 200k, you're going to feel pretty dang good. Where it's not going to feel good is if you want to push things like, let's say, Delirious plus Titanic. When you start doing stuff like that, the super late game farms, the enemies are going to be too tanky and the DPS is going to start to fall off on that point. But the rest of the content, this should feel very, very good. For me, myself, with this 4 million DPS, with Adrenaline Onslaught, I would love this for doing like guarding rotations and farming those. So you got to find out whether or not this is a build for you. Hopefully, I've gone over all the mechanics, the basic gearing. You can look at both the cheap gear set and the Rathpith gear set, which is more of a mid-budget gear setup, as well as the trees, and see what you think. See if it's a build for you. I personally think this would be a lot of fun. And full disclosure, this is what I was going to start 100% until I had a bit of a second guessing. Yesterday, they revealed the small passive nodes for the Ascendancies, and Surfcaster got nothing. All of Surfcaster's small nodes are dead nodes. And this just got me thinking that Fairgrave's Tricorn is going to work with the Surfcaster Ascendancy, and I usually am pretty good about not getting FOMO'd into playing something. This is one of the examples where I'm getting FOMO'd. I'm just thinking about the fact where I could be playing the character that gets 80% movement speed on its first lab, and I can't get that thought out of my head. So I might be second guessing myself into actually starting the Surfcaster Sanctum Rush instead, just because of how feels good it would be to have that movement speed at that level. It would just be the most insane league start. And I'm definitely getting FOMO'd into it. So right now the thought process is I'm probably going to league start that. If we find out Tricorn doesn't work, I will instantly re-roll to this Vaal Cold Snap plan. That is my current thoughts on my league start. Hopefully, regardless, either way, this is if it's interesting you, hopefully it's something fun you can think about playing. If not, as always, thanks for watching the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Take care, Exiles, and peace out. Have a good one.